Hello and welcome to another episode of this Python tutorial series. In last week's episode, we saw three different parameters which we can apply to the pack command when dealing with geometry in the Tkinter library. Today, we will complete that topic and look at three more parameters that we can use within the pack command. Specifically, these are called pad, ipad, and no, I don't mean the one produced by Apple, and anchor. Now, these three parameters are particularly important because, as we've seen so far, the label has only been as large as the writing inside it. However, what happens if we want to add more space within the label itself or within its surroundings? Well, we can do that, of course, using the commands I've just mentioned. We can start off by using the pad x and pad y commands as follows. We can say, for example, label1 dot pack, of course, and then we can say side equals tk dot top, just to use some of the commands we saw last week. Then fill equals tk dot x, and pad y, which will give us our vertical distance, is equal to 10. Then we can copy this line and repeat it twice more underneath. And then we can change, of course, this will be label 2 and this will be label 3. And this will be pack 30 and this will be pack 60. So if we run the code now, here we have that our labels have now been separated by a given amount of space. Now this is because we've given each label in the y direction a certain amount of additional space to allow it to separate it from the others. This additional space outside of the label is called padding. Hence pad x for the x direction, and as we've used here, pad y for the y direction. The second command we will see today is very similar to pad y and is called ipad y. This also has its corresponding command ipad x, and this, whilst pad y refers to external padding in the y direction and pad x refers to external padding in the x direction, ipad y and ipad x refer to internal padding within the same two directions. Now, what do we mean by internal padding? Well, I'll show you this quite simply by adding the I in front of ipad y, and then we can run the code again, and you can see that this time the additional space, instead of being allocated outside of the label, has now been incorporated within the size of the label itself. So the labels have now become larger than the words that are actually contained inside it. Now, the last command we will see today, and indeed the last one in my opinion that is important to know about the pack command, is the keyword anchor. Now, the anchor parameter allows us to anchor, as the word would have it, our label, in this case, to a given edge of our allocated space. This, of course, as with many things in Python, is easier to show than it is to explain in words. So let's go ahead and write out label1 dot pack, and that will be ipad x, to use one of the commands we saw before, is equal to 50. Then ipad y is also equal to 50, and this of course is the number of pixels. Then expand equals true, and finally anchor equals w. Then we can copy this underneath and do this also for label 2. And we can say that anchor equals, for example, north. Because of course I should also state that the values which our anchor parameter can attain are north, south, east and west, center, but then the anchor parameter can also take 4 additional values which are northwest, which indicates the top left-hand side of our screen, northeast, which is the top right, southeast, which is the bottom right, and southwest, which is the bottom left. Now, having said that, we can run our code, and as you can see, we have our two labels. The first, label 1, is coding, and that will be anchored to the left-hand side of our screen, or in other words, the west. Similarly, our second label, called specs, has now been anchored to the north. Now here is something to take away and think about. Although our specs label has been anchored to the north, so in theory towards the top of our screen, why is it that it is lower than our coding label, which has been anchored to the west? Now have a think about this, and if you think you know the answer, write it out in the comments below. I will reveal the answer in our next tutorial, so make sure to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss it. As usual, I look forward to seeing you all again next week for another video, and until then, feel free to check out my other tutorials as well as coding challenges. You can find a link to these in the top of your screen as well as in the comments down below. As always, all that's left for me to say now is see you next week and happy coding!